The knock came after dark, when the desert had already decided who would live through the night. A lone cowboy, scarred by fire and loss since childhood, opened his door expecting trouble and found a woman standing in the cold, holding a feverish baby with a silent 5-year-old clinging to her skirt. No horse, no wagon, no safe place left to run. He had survived a house fire that took everyone he loved. Now, fate was asking him a question he had avoided for years. Would he open the door or turn away and let the past repeat itself? What happens next will make you believe in quiet miracles and second chances for the forgotten. Before we begin, tell me where you are watching from. Drop your country in the comments below. If you believe no child or animal should ever face fear alone, hit subscribe now and share this story with someone who needs hope. Silver Hollow was less a town than a stubborn pause in the vastness of the New Mexico territory. A scattering of weather-silvered buildings clinging to the edge of a canyon like barnacles on an old ship. In daylight, the place looked bleached and honest. Dusty streets, hitching rails, a church that leaned slightly as if it had heard too many confessions. At night, it became something else, a bowl of darkness where the wind prowled like a hungry animal. Winter hadn't fully claimed the land, but it haunted it, thin cold that cut through wool and into bone, and a sky so clear the stars seemed sharp enough to draw blood. The moon hung low and pale, a clipped coin of light, and coyotes sang from the ridgelines in voices that sounded like laughter and grief arguing with each other. Elias Boone lived 2 miles west of Silver Hollow, where the canyon widened and the scrub gave way to scattered juniper and pinon. His cabin sat tucked against a rise of stone, sheltered from the worst of the north wind, but not from loneliness. The place was built like its owner, simple, stubborn, and a little scarred. Rough timber walls, a roof patched more than once, a small corral for his horse, and a lean-to where he kept tools and a stack of firewood. He'd chosen the spot because it was far enough from town that no one came by accident and close enough that he could ride in for supplies without losing the better part of a day. The man himself looked as though the land had shaped him with a hard hand. Elias was 28, tall and rangy, with shoulders that had learned their strength the way a mule learns its burden, one load at a time, without complaint. His face had sharp lines and angles, as if it had been carved from the same rock that guarded the canyon. A narrow scar cut through his right eyebrow, leaving the hair there stubbornly uneven. He wore his dark hair trimmed short, not out of vanity but practicality, and he kept his beard in a rough shadow that never quite became a proper whisker. His eyes were the color of creek water under winter sky, gray-blue, steady, and hard to read. People in town said he was quiet. That was true, but it wasn't the whole truth. Elias wasn't merely silent, he was careful. Words to him were like matches, useful, dangerous, and not to be struck without reason. The carefulness had a beginning. When Elias was 12, fire took his family. It wasn't a romantic tragedy with hymns and last words. It was the ugly kind. A lantern knocked over, dry timber, wind eager for destruction. He had been sleeping in the small shed with the horse, sick with a cough, and woke to smoke clawing at his throat. By the time he broke out into the yard, the house was already a roaring mouth of flame. He remembered the sound most, wood snapping, his mother screaming his name once, and then the world swallowing the rest. Men later told him it wasn't his fault. That was the sort of comfort people offered when they didn't know what else to do. Elias carried the truth like a stone in his pocket. He had lived, and they had not. It made him believe in 2 things. First, that the world could turn cruel in a blink without warning. Second, that you could survive nearly anything if you stopped expecting fairness. He'd been a cowboy since he was old enough to ride hard and work harder. Hired hand, trail rider, occasional wrangler for the small ranches that dotted the territory. He didn't drink much, didn't gamble, didn't linger in the saloon. Folks said he acted like a man who'd made a vow to keep his heart behind a fence. Maybe he had. Solitude was safer. Solitude didn't burn. That night, the wind worried at the eaves as if it wanted inside. Elias sat by the stove with a tin cup of coffee cooling between his hands, boots still on because taking them off felt like inviting softness. The fire in the stove was low, steady, and he kept it that way on purpose. A roaring blaze made too much light, too much heat, too much of the old memory rising like smoke. He had learned to live with small flames. The knock came after dark, not the pounding knock of a drunk or a salesman with more confidence than sense. This was softer, uneven, the kind of sound a person made when they weren't sure they had the right to ask for anything at all. Elias didn't move at first. Out here, visitors after sundown usually meant trouble. Lost men, desperate men, men who arrived with lies in their mouths and guns on their hips. He set the coffee down and let his gaze drift to the rifle leaning near the door. His hand went to it the way a prayer goes to a believer, not dramatic, just habitual. He listened. The wind moaned. Coyotes called again, farther off, and then, faintly, a sound that didn't belong to the land, the thin, broken cry of a baby. Elias's breath caught, small and involuntary. Babies weren't part of his life. Babies belonged to warm kitchens, women's laughter, and houses that didn't creak like old bones. A baby's cry outside his door felt like a wrong note in the song of the night. He lifted the rifle, not raised, not aimed, just held it and opened the door. Moonlight spilled across the threshold. A woman stood there, swaying slightly, her boots caked with mud that had dried into a crust. She was tall but worn thin by hunger and effort, a long-bodied kind of grace that looked like it had been forced to run too far. Her skin was pale beneath a smear of dust, freckled across the bridge of her nose where the sun had found her in better times. Strands of auburn hair had escaped from a loose braid and clung to her cheeks. Her eyes were a dark hazel, glassy with exhaustion, but sharp with the fierce alertness of someone who'd learned to watch for danger in every shadow. She couldn't have been more than 30, yet she carried herself like she'd already lived 2 lives and lost both. In her arms was a bundled infant, maybe 4 or 5 months old, wrapped in a threadbare quilt. The baby's face was flushed, mouth opening in a weak cry that sounded more like protest than strength. One tiny hand stuck out of the blanket, fingers curling and uncurling as if grasping for something invisible. Beside her stood a child, a boy around 5, his cheeks wind-reddened, his hair the color of wheat straw, cut unevenly as though someone had done it in a hurry with dull scissors. He wore a too-big coat belted with twine. His eyes were large and solemn, the gray-green of sage leaves after rain. He held the woman's skirt with one hand and a small wooden horse with the other, charred at one ear, as if it had once been too close to a fire. The woman's voice came out like it had to climb a steep hill. "Please," she said, "just one night, somewhere warm, the baby—" Her words broke, and she swallowed hard, as if she'd refused to let herself cry for so long that even the act of speaking threatened to crack her. Elias's gaze moved past them, scanning the darkness. No horse, no wagon, no lantern glow down the road, only the vast empty night holding its breath. "You walked?" he asked. The woman nodded once, tight and controlled, like she didn't trust her head to move too much. The boy blinked up at Elias, then at the rifle, then back again. He didn't look afraid so much as wary, as if fear was a luxury he'd already spent. Elias noticed the woman's hands, raw with blisters, knuckles scraped, one wrist marked with a bruise the color of old fruit. Not an accident bruise, a handprint bruise. He felt something sour tighten in his stomach. "What's your name?" he asked, not because it mattered to the door, but because it mattered to the truth. She hesitated. "Sarah." It was a good name for her, plain, strong, with an old Bible steadiness. He believed her, though he also believed she might be using it like a shield. "And the children?" She shifted the infant higher. "This is Eli," she said softly. The baby's name breathed as if it were a charm against harm. Then she rested her hand on the boy's shoulder. "Noah." Noah's fingers tightened around the burned wooden horse. Elias made a decision the way a man steps into cold water, without ceremony, because delaying didn't change the fact. He opened the door wider. "Come in." Sarah's eyes widened, a flash of disbelief so bright it looked like hope trying to rise and not quite daring. "We can stay in the barn," she said quickly, as if offering herself a smaller mercy to make it easier for him. "The barn's colder than a banker's smile," Elias replied, the dry humor surprising even him. "And the baby ain't sleeping with hay." Noah's lips twitched, almost a smile, then vanished as if he didn't trust it. Sarah stepped inside, and the warmth hit her like a wave. Her shoulders sagged, and for a heartbeat she looked like she might fold in half from relief. Elias shut the door and slid the bolt. The sound was final, a hard click that said the night would have to argue with wood and iron if it wanted in. The cabin smelled faintly of coffee, smoke, and saddle leather. A single lamp on the table cast a circle of gold light. Sarah stood in it like a figure conjured, clutching her children as if the walls might dissolve. Elias set the rifle back against the doorframe, keeping it close. "Sit," he said, nodding to the bench by the stove. "Let the baby warm." Sarah moved slowly, careful with her footing, lowering herself and the bundle onto the bench. Eli fussed weakly, then quieted a little, face pressed against Sarah's chest. Noah remained standing, eyes scanning the room, memorizing corners like a small soldier. His gaze snagged on the stove and the small flame inside it, and he stiffened. Elias saw it, the way the boy's body went tight, the way his breathing changed. "You don't like fire," Elias said gently. Noah's chin lifted in defiance that didn't match his size. "Fire eats things." Elias felt his throat tighten. "Yeah," he said, "it does." He moved to the kettle and poured water, setting it to heat. He kept his back half turned, giving Sarah space to exist without being stared at. "There's bread," he said. "Not much, but it's honest." Sarah's hands trembled as she tore off a piece, as though her body had forgotten how to accept. Noah took a bite without being told, chewing fast like he feared the food might be taken away. Elias watched the baby. The infant's cheeks were too red, his breathing shallow. "He's sick," he said. Sarah's shoulders went rigid. "Fever," she admitted. "2 days. I tried." Her voice caught. "I tried everything I know." Elias nodded. He didn't say the things men said when they were trying to sound kind. He didn't say it would be fine. The territory taught you not to make promises the world could laugh at. Instead, he said, "We'll cool him down, keep him drinking, keep him breathing." He glanced at Sarah's face, dust and exhaustion, but beneath it, a stubbornness that looked like survival itself. "And you," he added, "are going to eat." Sarah stared at him as if he'd handed her a miracle and she didn't trust miracles. "Why?" she whispered. Elias lifted the kettle when it began to hiss, poured steaming water into a basin, and set it on the table with a clean cloth. "Because," he said, and the answer felt older than him, older than his grief. "Someone ought to." A gust of wind slammed into the cabin wall. The lamp flickered. Noah flinched and pressed closer to Sarah. For a moment, the night sounded like it was pacing just outside, annoyed at being denied. Elias went to the window and looked out. Nothing but darkness, scrub, and moonlight. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that this knock hadn't been an accident. People didn't arrive at a lonely cabin with 2 children unless something behind them was worse than the cold. He returned to the stove, keeping his movements calm, because calm was contagious, and fear was too. Sarah dabbed Eli's forehead with the cloth, murmuring soft nonsense words a mother invents when language isn't enough. Noah sat rigidly, holding his charred wooden horse like a talisman. Elias reached into a tin on the shelf and pulled out a small bundle of dried willow bark. Old trail knowledge, not a doctor's certainty, but sometimes the difference between a fever and a grave was the difference between doing something and doing nothing. He set it beside the kettle. "We'll make a tea," he said. "Slow." Sarah's eyes lifted to his, and for the first time, the fierce alertness in them softened into something human and raw. "You don't even know us," she said, voice barely above the crackle of the stove. Elias met her gaze, and in his chest something stirred. An old ache, a bruise that never healed, a memory of a house burning, and a boy standing helpless in the yard. He didn't tell her that story, not yet, but it sat between them like a shadow. "I know what it sounds like," he said quietly. "A baby crying in the cold." He nodded toward Noah. "A kid who thinks fire is a mouth. I know what it looks like when someone's been chased by more than weather." Outside, a coyote called again, closer now, as if curious. Sarah's grip tightened around Eli. "We'll be gone at first light," she promised quickly, the words tumbling out, desperate to be believed. "We won't bring trouble." Elias didn't argue. He simply walked to the door and checked the bolt again, then returned to his chair by the stove where the shadows couldn't sneak up on him. He rested the rifle across his knees, not pointed, not threatening, just present. "Get some rest," he told her. "All of you." Sarah hesitated, then nodded. She lay Eli down carefully on the bench with the quilt tucked close, then guided Noah toward the small back room. Noah paused at the doorway and looked at Elias, solemn as a judge in a child's body. "Are you mean?" Noah asked. Elias almost laughed, the sound catching on the way out like it wasn't used to daylight. "Only when I have to be," he said. "Mostly I'm tired." Noah considered that, then gave a tiny nod as if that answer made sense in a world that didn't. He disappeared into the back room with Sarah, and Elias heard the bed creak, heard the soft hush of Sarah's voice, the faint whimper of the baby settling. Elias sat alone again with the stove's low flame. He listened to the cabin breathe, he listened to the wind, he listened for hoofbeats, for shouted voices, for the kind of silence that meant men were being careful. Nothing came. But out here, nothing was often only the beginning of something. He stared into the small fire, and in it he saw two things at once: the hungry blaze of his childhood, and this modest flame, kept small on purpose, trying its best to be a kindness, instead of a destroyer. The coyotes sang again under the clipped moon, and Elias Boone, who had sworn, without ever speaking the vow aloud, to never need anyone again, kept watch through the long, cold night, because a woman named Sarah and two small boys were sleeping under his roof, and the world had already burned enough. Dawn came to Silver Hollow the way it always did, without ceremony and without mercy. The cold loosened its grip by degrees, retreating inch by inch as pale light spilled over the canyon rim. The land did not soften with morning. It merely revealed itself. Dust lay where it had always lain. Scrub stood stiff and unforgiving. The sky was a washed blue, vast and empty, as if God himself had stepped back to watch what men would do next. Elias Boone had not slept. He sat upright in the chair by the stove, rifle across his thighs, boots planted firmly on the floor as though the earth itself might try to pull him under if he relaxed. The fire had burned low through the night, never once allowed to flare. He had fed it sparingly, the way a man fed a secret he did not trust. His eyes were rimmed with red, but his gaze was steady, trained on the window where the light was growing stronger by the minute. Outside, the coyotes had gone quiet. That silence unsettled him more than their cries. Animals, like men, were loudest when they were afraid or hungry. Quiet often meant waiting. From the back room came the faintest sound of movement, a bed creaking, fabric rustling, a woman shifting her weight carefully so as not to wake a child. Elias felt the tension in his chest tighten and then ease, not gone, but redirected. Whatever had brought Sarah and her children to his door had not followed them through the night, not yet. He rose slowly, joints stiff, and set fresh water on the stove. Coffee would come later. First, there were other things to tend to, things more fragile than himself. Sarah emerged from the back room just as the kettle began to whisper. In the clearer light of morning, Elias saw her more fully. She had washed her face with the water he'd left out, but the exhaustion remained, etched deep around her eyes and mouth. Her auburn hair was loose now, falling in tired waves to her shoulders, threaded with dust she hadn't yet had the strength to care about. She wore the same traveling dress as the night before, faded blue with a tear at the hem, cinched at the waist with a belt that had seen better years. She moved carefully, every motion measured, as though her body were a ledger of debts she could not afford to worsen. Eli was in her arms, wrapped tightly, his small face still flushed but less angry than before. His breathing was steadier, though shallow, and when Sarah adjusted her hold, he let out a weak complaint that faded quickly into a soft sigh. "He slept some," she said quietly, as if afraid to tempt fate by saying more. Elias nodded. "That's good." Noah followed her out, barefoot, clutching the wooden horse to his chest. In the gray morning light, the burn mark on the toy was more visible, a blackened scar along its side. The boy's hair stuck up at odd angles, and there was a smudge of soot on his cheek, left behind by a dream or a memory that hadn't fully released him. He paused just inside the room, eyes darting to the stove, then to the window, then finally to Elias. "It's morning," Noah said, stating it like a question. "It is," Elias agreed. The boy studied him for a long moment. "Morning means you're still alive," he said, as if this were a rule he had learned the hard way. Elias felt the words land heavier than they should have. "Usually," he replied, "and today's a good day for it." Noah seemed satisfied with that answer. He sat on the bench near the table, legs dangling, and began to roll the wooden horse back and forth along the edge, careful not to let it fall. Elias poured hot water into a chipped mug and handed it to Sarah. "Willow bark tea," he said. "Bitter, but it'll help." She accepted it with both hands, nodding. "Thank you." The words came easier in daylight, less desperate, but no less sincere. They drank and sat in a fragile quiet, broken only by the crackle of the stove and the occasional sound Eli made as he shifted in his sleep. Elias watched the baby closely, the way one watches a flame you're trying not to let die or grow too wild. He had no great knowledge of infants, but he knew enough to recognize danger when he saw it. The fever had loosened its hold, but it had not let go entirely. "You'll need milk," he said. "Goat, if you can get it. There's a woman near town, Elma Crow, keeps a few goats. She'll sell." Sarah hesitated. "I don't have—" "I do," Elias cut in, not unkindly. "You can argue with me later if it makes you feel better." Her mouth tightened, pride warring with necessity. Then she nodded. "All right." He set a piece of bread on the table for Noah, who took it without waiting to be told. The boy ate quickly, but not carelessly, eyes lifting now and again to track Elias's movements. There was something observant about him, a watchfulness that sat too easily on such small shoulders. Elias pulled on his coat and hat. The coat was heavy wool, worn thin at the elbows, smelling faintly of smoke and horse. "I'll ride into town," he said. "Get what we need." Sarah's gaze sharpened. "We should be gone before you get back." Elias met her eyes. "You shouldn't." The words hung between them, not as an order, but as a truth neither of them liked. Sarah looked down at Eli, brushing her thumb over his warm cheek. "We can't stay," she said softly. "You don't know what you're inviting." "I know enough," Elias replied. He did not elaborate. Some things were clearer without explanation. Before she could argue further, a sound drifted in through the open door, a low, unfamiliar huff followed by the scrape of claws on wood. Noah's head snapped up. "There's something outside," he whispered. Elias turned, hand drifting toward the rifle by habit, then stopped when he saw the source. A dog stood just beyond the threshold, lean as hunger itself. It was a rangy mongrel, yellow-gray in color, ribs faintly visible beneath a pug. Coarse coat scarred by old fights. One ear stood upright, the other bent at an awkward angle, torn long ago and healed badly. Its eyes were amber and wary, fixed on Elias with the caution of a creature that had learned men were unpredictable. The dog did not growl. It did not bark. It simply stood there, tail low, waiting. "Well," Elias murmured, "you're a long way from wherever you started." The dog tilted its head slightly, as if considering him. Then it took one careful step closer, sniffed the air heavy with coffee and bread and baby scent, and sat. Noah slid off the bench and approached slowly. "Can I?" he asked, eyes never leaving the dog. Elias nodded once. Slow. Noah knelt and extended his hand. The dog leaned forward, sniffed, then licked the boy's fingers with a quick tentative flick of its tongue. Noah laughed, a short surprise sound that seemed to shock him as much as anyone else. Sarah watched, tension easing just a fraction. "He followed us last night," she said. "From the ridge. I thought he'd leave." "Looks like he's not good at that," Elias said. The dog's tail thumped once against the ground, cautious but hopeful. "I should go," Elias said, turning back toward the corral. "I'll be back before noon." Sarah hesitated, then nodded. We'll wait." Elias saddled his horse quickly, movements efficient and practiced. The horse, a bay gelding with a white sock and patient eyes, snorted softly as Elias mounted. He paused, scanning the land one more time. The morning looked clean, but he knew better than to trust appearances. The ride into Silver Hollow was quiet. Town was waking slowly, smoke rising from chimneys, a man sweeping dust from his storefront as if it were a problem he could solve with persistence. Elias dismounted near the general store and tied his horse. Inside, the air smelled of flour and leather and old news. Elma Crow was there, just as he'd guessed. She was a stout woman in her late 50s, hair iron gray and pulled into a severe bun that did nothing to hide her sharp eyes. Widowhood had carved her into something both harder and kinder, depending on what was required. She took one look at Elias and raised an eyebrow. "You look like hell," she said. "Morning to you too," Elias replied. He bought goat's milk, a small tin of honey, clean cloths, and more coffee than he usually allowed himself. Elma watched him pack the items, her gaze shrewd. "You got company," she said, not asking. Elias met her eyes. A woman. 2 kids. Elma's expression softened just a hair. "Running?" "Yes." She nodded as if that settled something. "You always did have a way of finding trouble that wasn't yours." "Or maybe trouble finds what it needs," Elias said. He rode back with the supplies secured, mind turning over possibilities he did not like. He scanned the ridges, the road, the dry creek beds. No riders, no dust plumes. Still, the sense of being watched crept under his skin. When he reached the cabin, the dog was lying in the shade of the lean-to, head lifting at his approach. Inside, Sarah sat on the bench feeding Eli small spoonfuls of milk, while Noah sat at the table, drawing shapes in the dust with a stick. Elias dismounted and brought the supplies in. Sarah looked up, relief flickering across her face before she masked it. "Thank you," she said again, quieter this time. Elias set the milk down and glanced at the door, then the window. "Someone may come looking," he said, voice low. "Not today. Maybe tomorrow. Maybe soon." Sarah's shoulders tensed. "I knew it. I didn't say this to scare you," he continued. "I said it so we're not lying to each other." Noah looked up. "Bad men?" Elias crouched to the boy's level. "Men who think they're owed something," he said. "That doesn't always make them bad, but it makes them dangerous." The dog padded over and sat beside Noah, pressing its thin body close. The boy wrapped an arm around its neck without thinking, as if they had always belonged together. Elias straightened. Outside, the wind picked up, carrying dust and the faint, distant sound of hooves that might have been nothing at all. For now, the cabin held. For now, the fire stayed small and warm. But Elias Boone knew better than most that peace in the territory was rarely permanent. It was borrowed time, and borrowed time always came due. By the second evening, the land had begun to remember them. The wind shifted first, turning restless and sharp, carrying grit that stung the eyes and set the scrub whispering among itself. Clouds gathered low over the canyon rim, thin as old gauze, threatening rain that might never come. Silver Hollow did not welcome newcomers kindly. It tested them, measured how much they could endure before breaking. Elias Boone felt that old instinct stir in him, the one that had learned to read the ground the way other men read letters. Something was moving, and not all movement made a sound. Sarah spent the afternoon inside, tending to Eli with quiet efficiency. In the fuller light of day, her strength showed itself not in speed but in precision. She measured the baby's breath with her palm, timed his feeding by instinct, and kept her voice low and steady even when his fussing returned. The fever had loosened further, but the child remained fragile, a small warmth held against a cold world. Sarah's face had softened since morning, though the lines of worry had not left her. She moved like someone used to carrying weight without complaint, tall and straight-backed, her hands sure despite the tremor that visited her when she thought no one was watching. Noah had claimed the dog. The mongrel, still nameless, followed him from room to room with cautious devotion. In the afternoon light, its age became clearer, not old but worn. Its muzzle was flecked with gray, its coat patchy in places where fights or hunger had taken their toll. One hind leg bore a faint limp that worsened when the ground cooled. Yet there was intelligence in its amber eyes and a patience that suggested it had once belonged to someone and learned what it meant to wait. Noah fed it crumbs and told it stories in a half-whisper, as if the animal were a priest and the confessions mattered. Elias worked outside, repairing a section of fence the wind had worried loose. He moved methodically, hammer striking nail with practiced rhythm. From where he stood, he could see the road that cut between his land and the distant town, a pale scar against the earth. He checked it often, more often than he wanted to admit. He did not expect trouble to announce itself. Trouble, in his experience, preferred to arrive wearing the mask of inevitability. The first sign came in the dust. It was subtle, easy to miss if you weren't looking for it. A line disturbed where no cattle had passed, the soil pressed deeper than a deer's hoof would make. Elias crouched, running his fingers along the mark. Horses. At least 2. The tracks were a day old, perhaps less. They skirted the edge of his property without crossing it, as though whoever rode them had chosen caution over curiosity. Elias straightened slowly. His jaw tightened, beard shadow darkening with the set of his mouth. He knew the difference between a rider passing through and a rider looking for something. These tracks did not belong to a man simply traveling on. He did not tell Sarah right away. There was no sense in turning concern into panic. Instead, he went to the corral and saddled his horse, checking the cinch twice, adjusting the bridle with care. He carried himself with the calm of a man preparing for a storm he could not yet see, only feel. He rode toward town as the afternoon waned, not to gather supplies, but information. Silver Hollow was small, but it had ears everywhere. You did not survive in a place like that without knowing who was coming and why. At the edge of town, he reined in near the hitching rail by the saloon. A man stood there, leaning against the post, chewing on a piece of straw. He was broad and heavy-set, with shoulders slumped forward, as if he'd spent too many years bracing against bad weather and worse luck. His beard was thick and grizzled, streaked with gray, and his hat sat low over eyes that missed very little. This was Marshal Thomas Hale, no relation to anyone Elias knew, at least not that he'd admitted to. Hale had been appointed 5 years back after a botched robbery left the previous lawman dead in the street. Since then, Hale had kept order the way a fence keeps cattle, imperfectly, but enough. "Boone," Hale said, spitting to one side, "didn't expect to see you today." Elias dismounted. "Didn't expect to come." Hale's eyes flicked over him, measuring. "That usually means something's wrong. Sometimes it just means something's about to be," Elias replied. Hale snorted. "You always did have a taste for foreboding." He pushed off the post and straightened, joints popping. "What is it?" "Strangers," Elias said. "Riders, skirting my land." Hale's brow furrowed. "How many?" "2, maybe more." "That don't narrow it much." Hale's tone was casual, but his hand rested closer to the revolver on his hip. "We had a man pass through yesterday, well-dressed for this part of the territory. Didn't say much, asked about routes west, asked about families." Elias felt a cold thread pulled tight in his chest. "What kind of man?" Hale considered. "Tall, clean-shaven, eyes like he expected the world to move out of his way, money in his pockets by the look of him." He tilted his head. "Why?" "No reason," Elias said. It was a lie, but a necessary one. "Just thought you should know." Hale studied him. "You got something you're not saying." Elias met his gaze, unflinching. "I got something I'm handling." Hale sighed. "You always do." He paused, then added quieter. "If trouble comes knocking, Boone, you come get me. You hear?" Elias nodded once. It was not a promise. It was an acknowledgement. He rode back as the sun dipped lower, painting the sky in bruised shades of purple and red. The land stretched long and empty, and with every mile Elias felt the weight of choice pressing down on him. He had offered shelter. Shelter invited consequence. At the cabin, Sarah sensed it before he spoke. She was standing by the table, Eli cradled against her shoulder, humming under her breath. She looked up when Elias entered, her eyes searching his face with a familiarity that surprised them both. "You saw something," she said. Elias hung his hat on its peg. "Tracks. Riders." Her mouth tightened. "How close?" "Close enough." Noah looked up from the floor where he was lining stones in careful rows. "Are they bad men?" Elias knelt beside him. "I don't know yet." The dog lifted its head and growled softly, a low vibration that rolled out of its chest without sound. Its ears flattened, eyes fixed on the door as if it could see through wood and darkness both. "That's new," Elias murmured. The evening deepened. Elias checked the rifle, then the revolver at his hip, then set them both where he could reach them without haste. He barred the door and shuttered the window, leaving a narrow crack for air. The fire remained low, disciplined. He did not want its glow advertising warmth to the night. They ate in near silence. Sarah fed Eli carefully, watching each swallow as though it were a promise. Noah ate slowly now, appetite dulled by unease. The dog lay at his feet, a thin barrier of warmth and watchfulness. Afterward, as darkness pressed close, Sarah spoke again. "You don't owe us this." Elias leaned back in his chair, eyes on the door. "I didn't say I did." "Then why?" Her voice was steady, but there was something pleading underneath it, a need to understand the shape of her safety. Elias thought of the fire, of the years he had spent avoiding attachment like a man avoids open flame. "Because once," he said, choosing his words like tools. Someone knocked on a door for me, and there wasn't anyone left to answer. Sarah swallowed. She did not ask more. Some truths did not need prying open. Outside, the wind rose, carrying with it a sound that was not wind at all. Hooves. Distant, slow, deliberate. The dog stood, hackles lifting. Elias rose too, rifle in hand, and moved to the window. He didn't open it. He didn't need to. The sound told him enough. Someone was out there, not yet at the door, not yet calling, just close enough to remind him that borrowed peace always came with interest. He stayed where he was, listening, as the night tightened its grip around the cabin and the people inside it held their breath together. Night did not fall all at once. It crept in, testing the edges of the land, settling into the low places first. By the time the moon rose, thinner than the night before, sharp as a blade, the cabin sat in a pocket of quiet that felt staged, deliberate. Elias Boone knew that kind of quiet. It was the pause a man took before saying something he could not take back. The hooves did not come closer right away. They lingered somewhere beyond the first rise, out of sight, but not out of mind. Elias stood near the window with the rifle balanced easily in his hands, not tense, not relaxed, just ready. His breathing was slow, measured. Years of riding night watch on open range had taught him that panic wasted more energy than fear ever did. Behind him, the cabin lived softly. The stove ticked as it cooled and warmed in cycles. Sarah sat on the bench near the back wall. Eli pressed to her chest, her body curved around him like a shelter built of bone and will. In the dim light, her face looked leaner, more severe, shadows carving sharper lines along her cheekbones. Her hazel eyes did not leave Elias. She trusted him in the way people did when they had no safer choice. Noah knelt beside the dog, one small hand buried in its coarse fur. The animal's name had still not been spoken aloud, but names had a way of finding their owners in time. For now, the dog was simply there, muscle taut beneath skin, one ear cocked, amber eyes fixed on the door. It had stopped growling. That worried Elias more than noise would have. "Do you hear them?" Noah whispered. Elias nodded once. "I do." "Are they coming to get us?" Sarah's breath caught, quick and sharp before she could stop it. Elias crouched to Noah's level. In the half-light, the angles of his face softened, the hard lines easing just enough to make room for honesty. "They might come asking questions," he said. "That doesn't mean they get answers." Noah thought about that, brow furrowed in concentration. What if they don't like the answers? Elias's mouth curved in something that was not quite a smile. Then they picked the wrong door. The sound came again, closer this time. Hooves on packed dirt, slow, unhurried. Whoever rode out there did not fear ambush or surprise. Confidence, Elias knew, could be as dangerous as cruelty. A knock followed, not the hesitant knock of the night before. This one was firm, deliberate, the kind of knock a man made when he expected to be answered. Elias rose smoothly and moved to the door, positioning himself to one side of it. He did not lift the rifle. He did not hide it either. He opened the door. Moonlight spilled in, pale and unforgiving. Two men sat their horses just beyond the threshold, reins loose in their hands. Both were well-dressed by territorial standards, clean coats, good leather, boots polished enough to reflect a little of the light. They were not ranch hands or drifters. These were men who believed the road belonged to them. The one in front dismounted with an easy grace that spoke of long familiarity with the saddle. He was tall, broad through the shoulders, his posture straight as a fence post. His beard was neatly trimmed, dark with a trace of gray at the chin, framing a mouth that smiled without warmth. His eyes were pale brown, almost gold, and they measured Elias the way a buyer measured livestock. "Evening," the man said. His voice was smooth, educated, touched with an accent that suggested money had followed him for most of his life. "Sorry to trouble you so late." "You are troubling me," Elias replied evenly. The man's smile widened a fraction. "Then I'll get to the point. Name's Caleb Ashcroft." He removed his hat, not out of respect but strategy, and Elias saw hair cut carefully short, not a curl out of place. "I'm looking for my wife and my children." The second rider remained mounted. He was younger, narrower, with a long nose and restless eyes that never stopped moving. His coat hung a little loose on him, as if it had been handed down or borrowed. He didn't smile. He watched the door, the windows, the land behind Elias's shoulder. A man trained to look for exits. Elias didn't step aside. "You won't find them here." Ashcroft's gaze flicked past him, just briefly, taking in the dim interior. Sarah had not moved, but the tension in her body had gone rigid, like a bow drawn too far. Eli stirred and made a small sound. Ashcroft's eyes sharpened. "Now," Ashcroft said mildly. "That's a bold claim for a man living alone 2 miles from town." He took a step closer, boots crunching on gravel. "I have it on good authority that a woman matching my wife's description came through here. Tall, red hair, traveling with 2 boys. Sarah flinched at the word boys. Elias saw it, felt it like a tightening rope. "You've been misinformed," Elias said. Ashcroft chuckled. "No, Mr. Boone." "Well, Boone," Ashcroft said, tasting the name, "I'm not a man who enjoys being misled." He tilted his head, studying Elias with something like curiosity. "My wife has a habit of wandering when she's upset. She has a fragile disposition. Gets ideas. Dangerous ones." From behind Elias, Sarah spoke. Her voice was quiet, but it carried. "You don't get to speak for me anymore." Ashcroft's eyes locked onto her and the smile vanished. For a heartbeat, something ugly flickered across his face, possession stripped bare of pretense. "Sarah," he said softly, as if coaxing a skittish animal. "Come here." Elias shifted, placing himself fully between them. "You heard me. They're not leaving." Ashcroft laughed then, a short sound without humor. "You misunderstand. I'm not asking." His gaze dropped briefly to the rifle, then rose again, calculating. "I have papers, lawful claim. The children are mine by blood. The woman is mine by covenant." Elias felt heat stir in his chest, a slow burn that he kept banked. "You don't own people." Ashcroft's jaw tightened. "You frontier types are all the same. Romantic notions, no respect for order." He glanced back at his companion. "Jonah, tell him." The second man, Jonah, shifted in his saddle. Up close, Elias could see the scar along his jaw, pale against darker skin. A souvenir from violence survived rather than avoided. "He's right," Jonah said flatly. "We don't want trouble." Ashcroft raised a hand. "Not tonight." He turned back to Elias. "I'll give you a chance, Boone. Let them come out. I'll take them home, and this ends cleanly." Sarah's grip tightened on Eli. Noah's hand clenched in the dog's fur. Elias did not raise his voice. He did not need to. "You should leave," he said. "Now." Ashcroft stared at him for a long moment, then smiled again. Thin, sharp. "I admire your conviction." He stepped back and replaced his hat. "Enjoy it while you can." He mounted smoothly. Jonah followed suit, casting one last glance toward the cabin, his eyes lingering on the shuttered window. As they turned their horses, Ashcroft spoke over his shoulder. "I'll be back with daylight. And next time, I won't come so politely." They rode off at the same unhurried pace, their silhouettes swallowed by the night. Elias closed the door and slid the bolt home. The sound rang loud in the small space. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Sarah's knees buckled. Elias crossed the room in 2 strides and caught her before she fell, steadying her with a firm grip that asked nothing and offered everything. "He found us," she whispered, voice breaking at last. "I knew he would." Elias held her until her shaking eased. "He won't take you," he said. "Not tonight." Noah looked up, eyes bright with fear and something else, resolve perhaps, or trust. "You won't let him," he said, not a question. Elias met the boy's gaze and nodded. "No." The dog padded forward and sat at Elias's feet, pressing close. Its tail thumped once against the floor, slow and certain. Outside, the wind rose again, carrying dust and the faint echo of retreating hooves. The threat had shown its face, named itself, and promised more. Inside the cabin, the fire remained low and steady, and for now, that was enough. Morning arrived thin and brittle, as if the night had wrung all the warmth out of it. The sky over Silver Hollow was a pale, hard blue, the kind that promised no mercy from the sun later in the day. Frost clung to the shadowed edges of the ground, sparkling briefly before the light erased it. Elias Boone stood outside the cabin, boots planted wide, scanning the land with a stillness that came from long practice. The tracks from the night before were clearer now. 2 horses, shod, well kept, their riders careful not to ride too close. Men who believed patience was a weapon. Inside, the cabin was awake. Sarah moved quietly, the way people did when they feared waking something more dangerous than sleep. Eli rested against her shoulder, his small body warm but no longer burning. The fever had broken in the night, leaving him weak and hungry, his cries thin and easily soothed. Sarah looked older in the morning light, the strain of the past days etched into her posture. She was tall, narrow at the waist, with a straight-back dignity that hardship had not yet managed to bend. Her auburn hair was tied back again, practical and severe, but the softness in her eyes when she looked at her children betrayed the tenderness she guarded fiercely. Noah sat at the table, feet tucked beneath him, feeding the dogs small bits of bread he thought no one noticed. The animal had earned a place by the hearth without ceremony. In daylight, its age seemed to settle somewhere around 7 or 8, old enough to have learned caution, young enough to still hope. Its coat was rough, the yellow-gray fur darkened along the spine, and its torn ear gave it a permanently lopsided look. The limp in its hind leg was more pronounced after the cold night, but it bore the pain without complaint. It watched the door as it ate, eyes never fully relaxing. Elias came back in and shut the door behind him, sliding the bolt home. The sound was solid, final. "They won't come back this morning," he said. "Men like that prefer daylight when they want witnesses." Sarah nodded, though her hands tightened on Eli's blanket. "He'll bring papers." "Yes," Elias agreed. "And men who think papers are enough." She looked up at him then. Really looked. "What happens when the law agrees with him?" Elias did not answer right away. He poured coffee, black and bitter, and took a slow sip. "Then we find out what the law is worth," he said. By mid-morning, he was riding into town again. This time, he didn't go quietly. Silver Hollow was small, but word traveled fast in places like that. By the time Elias tied his horse near the saloon, "Mamash quoi. Eyes followed him openly. He felt them, the questions hanging unasked. Who were the strangers? Why had Ashcroft come? Why had Elias Boone, of all people, chosen to stand in the way? Inside the saloon, the air was thick with the smell of stale whiskey and sawdust. A man sat near the bar who did not belong. He was lean and sharp-faced, with a pencil-thin mustache and hair slicked neatly back from his forehead. His suit was dark, tailored too finely for the territory, and his boots were polished to a mirror shine. He held a leather folder on his lap like a shield. When he saw Elias, his mouth curved into a thin, knowing smile. "Mr. Boone," the man said, rising smoothly, "I was hoping we might speak." Elias stopped a few paces away. "You have the advantage." The man extended a hand that Elias did not take. "Frederick Lyle," he said. "Counsel for Mr. Caleb Ashcroft." Lyle's handshake lingered awkwardly in the air before he withdrew it, unfazed. Up close, his eyes were a watery blue, clever and cold. This was a man who had never thrown a punch in his life, but had ruined others with ink and signatures. "My client wishes to resolve this matter without unpleasantness," Lyle continued. "Mrs. Ashcroft and the children are his lawful family. Their removal was impulsive." Elias's jaw set. "She left." Lyle smiled as if indulging a child. "Women do that. It doesn't change ownership." Elias took a step closer. The saloon quieted, conversations tapering off as attention shifted. "Careful," he said softly. "You're standing in a place where words can get you hurt." Lyle's smile did not falter. "I don't doubt it, but I prefer to let the law do my hurting for me." He opened the folder and withdrew a sheaf of papers, tapping them lightly. "These are signed, witnessed. Mr. Ashcroft has full legal authority to retrieve his wife and children. If you interfere, you will be obstructing that authority." Elias glanced at the papers without touching them. "And if she refuses to go?" Lyle's eyes flicked, just briefly. "Then she will be compelled." Elias felt heat rise behind his ribs, a familiar burn he fought to keep contained. He thought of the fire from his boyhood, of how quickly control could be lost once the blaze took hold. "You should leave," he said, "before you mistake your papers for protection." Lyle inclined his head. "We will be at your property by afternoon," he said calmly. With the marshal present, I suggest you prepare." Outside, the sun climbed higher, unforgiving. Elias rode back with the knowledge sitting heavy in his gut. When the cabin came into view, he saw Sarah standing on the porch, Eli bundled against her, Noah at her side, the dog planted at their feet like a sentry. He dismounted and told her everything. He did not soften it. Sarah listened without interruption, her face going pale, then hard. When he finished, she nodded once. "Then I'll speak," she said. Elias frowned. "You don't have to." "I do," she replied. "Running made me small. I won't be small anymore." Noah looked between them. "Is he coming back?" "Yes," Sarah said gently. "But we're not going with him." The afternoon dragged, the light sharpened, shadows shortening as if the land itself were holding its breath. Near the edge of Elias's property, dust rose again. This time there were more riders. Caleb Ashcroft rode at the center, composed as ever, his coat immaculate. At his side rode Frederick Lyle, perched stiffly in the saddle, discomfort etched across his refined features. Marshal Thomas Hale followed, heavier in the saddle, his expression grim. Two other men trailed behind, hired hands by the look of them, broad-shouldered, silent, faces set in the neutral masks of men paid not to think. They stopped 20 yards from the cabin. Hale dismounted first. Up close, the lines in his face seemed deeper, the weight of his badge heavier than it had been the day before. "Boone," he said, "we need to talk." Elias stepped forward, rifle slung over his shoulder but his hands empty. "I'm listening." Hale gestured toward Lyle, who cleared his throat and began to read from the papers in a voice that carried authority without warmth. Ownership, custody, obligation. When he finished, silence settled over the clearing. Sarah stepped forward. She did not shout. She did not plead. She held Eli close and placed one steady hand on Noah's shoulder. "I am not property," she said. "My children are not goods to be reclaimed." Ashcroft scoffed. "You're confused." "I'm not," she said. "I left because you hurt us." Ashcroft's smile vanished. "Mind your tongue." Hale shifted uncomfortably. "Mrs. Ashcroft," he said, "The law lets men like him hide behind paper," Sarah interrupted, "but it doesn't change what he is." Noah's hand tightened in hers. The dog growled low. Hale looked at Elias, then at Sarah, then back at Ashcroft. Conflict played across his features. He was a man caught between order and conscience, and neither side offered comfort. "I'll give you until sundown," Hale said finally. "All of you. After that, I have to act." Ashcroft smiled again, satisfied. "You see? Reasonable." They turned and rode off, leaving dust and certainty behind them. Elias watched until they disappeared. Then he turned to Sarah. "We have until sundown," he said. She nodded. "Then we use it." Inside the cabin, the fire burned low. Outside, the sun began its slow descent. The law had spoken, and it had chosen sides. What remained was choice. The hours between the marshal's ultimatum and sundown stretched long and thin, like wire pulled tight between two posts. Time did not hurry for anyone in Silver Hollow, least of all for those waiting on a choice that would leave marks no water could wash away. The sun climbed, stalled, and began its slow, deliberate descent, casting the land in a light that felt both clarifying and cruel. Elias Boone worked without speaking much. He moved with the economy of a man who knew exactly how many minutes remained and refused to waste them. First, he checked the corral, counted nails, tested boards, tightened a hinge that had sagged with age. He moved the wagon so it blocked the narrow approach to the cabin, turning open ground into a funnel. Then he set stones where they would catch a boot at a bad angle and strung a length of wire low across the path, where a man running hard would not think to look. These were not tricks meant to kill. They were meant to slow. Slowness could save a life when seconds mattered. Inside, Sarah packed what little they owned into a canvas sack, extra cloth, bread wrapped in paper, the tin cup Eli favored when he drank. She worked steadily, jaw set, her movements betraying no panic. In the quiet, her resilience showed itself most clearly. She was tall and narrow-hipped, her shoulders straight as if she'd learned early that collapsing was a luxury. Her skin bore the faint map of sun and wind, freckles scattered across her forearms like constellations. She did not cry. When her hands shook, she stilled them by force of will and continued. Noah hovered near the table, watching both adults with the keen attention of a child who sensed that the world had tilted. He had stopped asking questions. Instead, he listened. He traced the grain of the wood with one finger, then lifted his head whenever Elias crossed the room. The wooden horse lay in his pocket now, tucked away like a promise he wasn't ready to show. Eli slept more than he woke, his breath shallow but even. When he stirred, Sarah murmured to him in a low voice, the sound soothing even to ears not meant for comfort. Elias noticed that she sang without words, a melody shaped from necessity rather than art. It reminded him of the way his mother used to hum while working, tunes that existed only to fill silence and make it less dangerous. The dog paced. It moved from door to window to the edge of the corral, nose testing the air, tail low. Every so often it stopped and lifted its head, ears pricked, then resumed its circuit. Elias watched it for a time, then spoke. "You keep doing that," he said quietly, "and you're going to wear a groove in my floor." The dog looked at him, head cocked, and huffed once. Noah smiled despite himself. "What's his name?" Noah asked. Elias shrugged. "He hasn't told me." Sarah glanced at the animal. "He followed us," she said, "from the ridge, stayed when he could have run." Noah considered this seriously. "Then he's called Stay." The dog's tail thumped once, decisive. "Well," Elias said, "that settles it." By mid-afternoon, the wind shifted again, coming down from the hills with a bite to it. Elias stepped outside and scanned the road. Nothing yet. The silence felt intentional, rehearsed. He did not like it. He mounted his horse and rode to the edge of his property, where the land dipped and rose again toward the creek bed. There he met Jonah Pike, not the man who'd ridden with Ashcroft, but another Jonah altogether. Pike was a neighboring rancher, broad-backed and stooped, his beard gone white in uneven patches that suggested age had arrived without permission. He leaned on the fence as Elias approached, hat pulled low over eyes made cautious by too many hard seasons. "Marshall came by," Pike said without greeting. "Said there'd be trouble." "Marshall says a lot of things," Elias replied. Pike nodded. "True enough, but he don't lie about trouble." He studied Elias's face. "You fixing to make a stand?" Elias did not answer directly. "I'm fixing to keep people safe." Pike sighed. "That's a young man's way of saying yes." He scratched his beard, gaze drifting toward the hills. "I won't fight your fight, but I'll tell you this, Ashcroft's kind don't scare easy. They scare others and call it order." "I know." Pike shifted his weight. "If it comes to it, I'll send my boy to fetch the Marshal Superior out of Red Mesa. Won't be fast, but it'll be something." Elias inclined his head. "That's enough." They parted without ceremony. Elias rode back with the knowledge that help, if it came, would arrive late. He planned as though it would not come at all. Inside the cabin, Sarah finished packing and sat at the table. "If it goes bad," she said, voice level, "I want you to take Noah and run." Elias stopped short. "No." She met his gaze, unflinching. "He's faster with you. You know the land. And leave you and the baby?" His voice was low, dangerous. "That's not a plan. It's a choice," she said. "One I've already made once." Elias felt the old fire stir, anger mixed with fear, heat pressing behind his eyes. He forced it down. "We don't separate," he said. "Not unless there's no other way." Noah stood, small and resolute. "I won't run without Mama." Elias knelt, placing a hand on the boy's shoulder. "Good," he said. "Then we won't." As the sun dipped closer to the horizon, a figure appeared on the road. Marshal Hale, riding alone this time. He dismounted near the wagon barrier and approached on foot, hat in his hands. Without the badge catching the light, he looked older, heavier, like a man carrying something he didn't want. "They're waiting," Hale said quietly. "Ashcroft and his men, down the road." "I figured," Elias replied. Hale rubbed his jaw. "Lyle's got his papers. They're clean enough to pass muster. I can't ignore that." "I'm not asking you to," Elias said. "I'm asking you to see." Hale looked past him, into the cabin where Sarah sat with Eli and Noah at her side. He took in the sight slowly, his expression tightening. "She's afraid," he said. "Yes," Elias agreed. "And she's right to be." Hale closed his eyes briefly. I got a wife and 2 girls in town, he said. If a man treated them the way she says. He stopped, shook his head. Law ain't always justice. No, Elias said, but sometimes it can choose not to be cruelty. Hale exhaled. I'll buy you time. Talk sense into Lyle. That's all I can promise. That's more than nothing. Hale nodded and turned back toward his horse. Sundown, he said over his shoulder. That's when it all counts. The sky burned red as the sun kissed the canyon rim. Shadows lengthened, stretching like fingers across the ground. Elias took his place near the door, rifle within reach. Sarah stood behind him, steady now, Eli quiet in her arms. Noah crouched beside Stay, one hand in the dog's fur, his small body leaning into borrowed courage. The world seemed to pause, balanced on the edge of decision. And in that pause, Elias Boone understood something he had avoided for years. Some fires were not meant to be feared or fled. Some were meant to be faced, controlled, used to light the dark. The first rider appeared at the far bend of the road just as the sun slipped from sight. The riders came out of the dusk the way bad news always did, without hurry, without doubt. The sun had slipped fully behind the canyon rim, leaving the land soaked in bruised purples and dying reds. What little light remained clung to the dust stirred by hooves, turning it into a drifting veil that made shapes uncertain and intentions harder to read. Elias Boone stood his ground near the cabin door, feet planted where he had chosen them hours before, rifle resting against his shoulder, not in threat, but in truth. There were 6 this time. Caleb Ashcroft rode at the center, his horse tall and well-bred, its tack polished and clean. The man himself looked unchanged by the waiting. His coat was still immaculate, his posture relaxed, his beard neatly trimmed as if he were attending a dinner rather than reclaiming a family by force. Confidence rolled off him like heat from sun-warmed stone. To his left rode Frederick Lyle, stiff-backed in the saddle, discomfort etched into his narrow face. His fine boots were already dusted and his lips were pressed thin with distaste. On Ashcroft's right was Jonah, the scarred man from before, jaw set, eyes hard, one hand resting close to his holster. 3 others followed, men of similar make. Broad, weathered, their beards rough and uneven, faces carved by labor and obedience rather than thought. Hired hands, paid to look past doubt. Marshal Hale rode last. His shoulders sagged slightly, as if the badge weighed more than it ever had before. He reined in first and dismounted, boots sinking into the dirt. He didn't reach for his gun. That, more than anything, told Elias how little control he truly had. Boone, Hale said, his voice carried, steady but strained. It's sundown. I know, Elias replied. Ashcroft swung down from his horse with an ease that bordered on arrogance. He dusted off his gloves and smiled as though greeting an old friend. I gave you time, he said. That was generous of me. Sarah stepped into view behind Elias. She had wrapped Eli close against her chest, the baby's small head tucked beneath her chin. Noah stood at her side, one hand gripping her skirt, the other buried in Stay's coarse fur. The dog stood rigid, muscles tight beneath its scarred hide, one ear forward, one bent. It did not bark. It did not growl. It waited. Ashcroft's eyes flicked to the children, and something sharpened there. Sarah, he said, his tone shifting, smoothing, as if gentleness were a tool he could pick up and set down at will. This has gone far enough. Come here. We'll end this quietly. Sarah did not move. Her voice when she spoke was steady. There's nothing quiet about what you do. Lyle cleared his throat and stepped forward, papers in hand. By the authority of enough, Elias said. The word cut through the air, low and dangerous. Lyle faltered, startled by the suddenness of it. Elias shifted the rifle, not raising it, simply letting its presence speak. You've had your say. You've brought your law and your men. Now you listen. Ashcroft laughed softly. You think this is your place to speak? It's my place, Elias said, and that's reason enough. For a moment, no one moved. The wind stirred the dust around their boots. Somewhere in the distance, a nightbird cried out, sharp and lonely. Then Ashcroft's patience snapped. You want to be a hero? He said, his voice hardening, the polish cracking to reveal iron beneath. You want to stand between a man and his family? He took a step forward. You're nothing but a hired hand with a cabin and a death wish. Elias felt the old memory surge, the roar of fire, the heat, the helplessness. He did not let it take him. Instead, he let it settle, controlled, like a flame banked low and useful. "I stood outside a burning house once," he said quietly. "Watched my family die because I was too small to break the door down." His eyes never left Ashcroft's. "I won't stand outside again." Ashcroft's lip curled. "Sentimental nonsense." He nodded once to Jonah. Jonah moved fast. The man's hand dropped to his gun, fingers curling around the grip. Elias had already shifted his weight, already anticipated the motion. The rifle came up in a smooth, practiced arc, not frantic, not rushed. The shot cracked the air, sharp and final. Jonah cried out as the bullet tore through his shoulder, spinning him sideways. He hit the dirt hard, scrambling, blood soaking into his coat. The hired men shouted, hands flying to weapons. "Stop!" Marshal Hale bellowed, drawing his revolver at last. "Stop, all of you!" For a heartbeat, chaos threatened to spill over. Horses reared, dust rose thick, voices collided. Then Ashcroft drew. He was fast, faster than Elias had expected. The gun flashed in his hand, muzzle swinging up toward the cabin, toward Sarah. Elias fired again. The sound echoed off the canyon walls, louder than the first. Ashcroft staggered, surprise blooming across his face as red spread across his chest. He dropped to his knees, the gun falling from his hand, and for a moment he looked less like a tyrant and more like a man finally realizing the world would not bend for him. He fell forward into the dirt. Silence crashed down, heavy and absolute. The hired men froze, eyes wide, hands hovering uselessly near their guns. Lyle stood rooted in place, papers slipping from his fingers to scatter across the ground like worthless leaves. Marshal Hale stared at Ashcroft's body, his face pale beneath the dust. Elias lowered the rifle slowly. His hands were steady. His heart was not. "Anyone else?" he asked, his voice calm in a way that frightened even him. No one answered. Hale holstered his gun with shaking hands. "Get him out of here," he snapped at the hired men, nodding toward Jonah, who was moaning softly in the dirt. "Now!" They didn't argue. Two of them lifted Jonah, hauling him toward their horses. Lyle scrambled to gather his papers, his earlier confidence shattered, and mounted without a word. Within moments, the riders were retreating down the road, leaving only churned dust and a body cooling in the twilight. Elias stood where he was, the rifle heavy in his hands. The fire inside him, the one he had feared his whole life, slowly ebbed, leaving behind a strange, hollow calm. Behind him, Sarah sank to her knees. Elias turned just in time to catch her, steadying her as her legs gave way. She pressed her face into his coat, breath hitching, not in fear now, but release. Eli stirred, then settled again, warm and alive. Noah stepped forward, his small hand reaching out to touch Elias's sleeve. "You stayed," he said. Elias swallowed. "So did you." Marshal Hale approached, his steps slow. He looked down at Ashcroft's body, then back at Elias. "I'll say he drew first," he said quietly, "because he did." He met Elias's eyes. "This won't be easy, but it'll stand." Elias nodded. "That's all I ask." Hale tipped his hat to Sarah, to the children, then turned away, shoulders heavy but his back straight. The light faded completely. Stars began to prick the sky, cold and distant. Elias guided Sarah back inside, bolting the door once more. The cabin felt different now. Not safer, not yet, but honest. Stay lay down by the hearth with a soft huff, placing himself squarely between the family and the door. Outside, the land exhaled. The fire in the stove burned low and steady, no longer something to fear, but something chosen. The night after the gunfire did not roar or weep. It settled. Silver Hollow lay under a sky rinsed clean of color, stars scattered like cold embers across black velvet. The canyon no longer echoed with hoofbeats or raised voices. What remained was a silence of a different kind. Not the waiting silence that had preceded violence, but the exhausted stillness that followed a storm once it had spent itself. Elias Boone sat on the cabin steps with his elbows on his knees, the rifle laid carefully beside him, untouched since dusk. His shoulders ached now that the urgency had drained away, and the tremor in his hands came not from fear, but from release. Inside, the cabin breathed. Sarah had put Eli down on the bed in the back room. The baby slept deeply, his small chest rising and falling with the steady rhythm of someone who did not yet know how close the world had come to breaking him. His skin was warm, healthy. The fever was gone for good this time. Sarah lingered beside him longer than necessary, her hand resting lightly on his back as if she needed the proof of movement to anchor herself. Noah sat at the table, swinging his legs, the wooden horse placed upright in front of him like a sentry. Stay lay sprawled across the floor near the hearth, finally allowing himself to rest. In the lamplight, the dog looked older than before, the lines of wear more visible now that vigilance had loosened its grip. Its torn ear twitched occasionally, responding to sounds no one else noticed. When Noah reached down to stroke its neck, the dog leaned into the touch without opening its eyes. Elias rose slowly and went back inside, shutting the door with care. He slid the bolt home, not out of fear this time, but habit. Some habits, he knew, did not need to be unlearned. Sarah emerged from the back room and stopped when she saw him. In the lamplight, her face looked different, still pale, still drawn, but no longer tight with imminent dread. She had let her hair loose again, and it fell around her shoulders in soft, tired waves. There was a faint smudge of blood on the sleeve of her dress where she had pressed against Elias earlier. She noticed him looking and brushed it away absently. "He's sleeping," she said. Elias nodded. "Good." They stood there for a moment, unsure of the shape of things now that the danger had passed. Outside, a breeze stirred, gentle and unthreatening, carrying the scent of dust and distant sage. Marshal Hale came by just before midnight. He did not knock loudly. He did not bring a posse. He stood at the door alone, hat in hand, his broad frame casting a familiar shadow across the threshold. In the lamplight, the fatigue in his face was unmistakable. His beard was streaked with gray, his eyes bloodshot from a day that had aged him more than the years before it. "I wanted to tell you myself," Hale said. "Ashcroft's men won't be back. Lyle rode out before dawn. Word will travel fast enough to keep the rest honest." "And Jonah?" Elias asked. Hale grimaced. "He'll live. Shoulder wound. Won't be riding for a while." He hesitated, then added, "There'll be questions, statements, but no charges." He met Elias's eyes squarely. "You did what you had to." Elias accepted that with a small nod. "Thank you." Hale's gaze shifted to Sarah, then to Noah, then back again. "You folks are safe," he said, not as a promise but a conclusion. "As safe as anyone gets out here." He tipped his hat and left, footsteps fading into the night. When the door closed, the cabin seemed larger somehow, as if the space no longer needed to brace itself against intrusion. Sarah let out a long breath she had been holding for days. Her shoulders sagged, and she sank onto the bench by the table, suddenly looking very tired. Elias poured her a cup of coffee, weaker than he usually made it, and set it in front of her. She wrapped her hands around it, the steam warming her fingers. "I don't know how to thank you," she said quietly. Elias leaned against the wall, crossing his arms. "You don't have to." She looked up at him then, really looked. At the hard lines of his face softened now by lamplight, at the scar above his eyebrow, at the weariness that sat beneath his steadiness. "You could have walked away," she said. "So many men would have." Elias was silent for a moment. Then he spoke, his voice low and even. "I walked away once," he said, "from a burning house, spent the rest of my life wishing I hadn't." He shook his head. "I wasn't going to do it again." Sarah's eyes filled, but she did not cry. Instead, she reached across the table and laid her hand over his. It was a simple gesture, unadorned, but Elias felt it like an anchor thrown into deep water. Noah cleared his throat. Both adults looked at him. "Does this mean," he asked carefully, "we don't have to run anymore?" Sarah opened her mouth, then closed it. Elias answered. "Not tonight," he said, "and not tomorrow." Noah considered this, then nodded with the solemn acceptance of a child who understood that permanence was a fragile thing. He picked up the wooden horse and walked it across the table toward Elias. "He needs a stable now," he said. Elias huffed a soft laugh before he could stop himself. "Guess we can manage that." The days that followed were quiet, but not empty. Ashcroft was buried on a ridge overlooking the canyon, the work done by men who did not ask questions and did not linger. Elias attended, not out of respect but because he believed in endings done properly. Sarah stayed behind with the children. When Elias returned, she did not ask what it had been like. People from Silver Hollow came by in ones and twos. Elma Crow with a basket of bread and goat cheese, Jonah Pike's boy delivering a message in a sack of grain, others stopping at the edge of the property with awkward offers of help. No one stayed long. They did not need to. Presence was enough. Eli grew stronger by the day, his cries gaining volume and conviction. Noah explored the land with Stay at his heels, learning the names of rocks and plants as if cataloging a future. The dog, now firmly named Stay, healed slowly, the limp easing as rest replaced hunger. He took to sleeping near the door at night and near the children during the day, a quiet guardian with no need for thanks. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in soft gold rather than blood, Sarah stood beside Elias at the fence. The land stretched out before them, open and honest. "We can leave," she said, "if you want us to. I know this place was yours long before we came." Elias looked out over the land he had chosen for its emptiness. He thought of the nights it had echoed with nothing but wind, of the years he had spent filling silence with work so he would not have to listen to memory. Then he thought of Noah's laughter, of Eli's warm weight in his arms when Sarah needed rest, of Stay's steady presence by the hearth. "This place isn't a thing to own," he said finally. "It's just ground. What makes it worth staying on is who stands here." Sarah nodded slowly. "Then we'll stay," she said, "if you'll have us." Elias did not answer right away. Instead, he reached up and carved a small mark into the fence post with his knife. Nothing fancy, just a line beside older lines made by weather and time. "Looks like you already are." That night, the fire burned a little higher than usual, not wild, not hungry, just enough to push back the dark. And for the first time since he was a boy standing helpless in a yard of flame, Elias Boone sat in the warmth of chosen family and understood that fire, when held with care, could be something other than loss. It could be home. Sometimes God does not arrive with thunder or fire. Sometimes he comes quietly, as a knock in the dark, as a door that opens when it would have been easier to stay closed, as a stranger who chooses kindness when no one is watching. This story reminds us of a simple truth. Miracles are not always loud. Often, they look like shelter instead of escape, like courage instead of strength, like one person deciding that no child, no mother, no lost soul should face fear alone. In our own lives, we may not hear coyotes or gunfire, but we all face moments when the night feels long, when hope feels thin, when we are standing outside a door, wondering if anyone will let us in. And maybe, just maybe, God is asking us the same question he asked that lonely cowboy. Will you turn away, or will you answer the knock? If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to share it with someone who may need hope tonight. Leave a comment and tell us where you are watching from. Your words may be the encouragement someone else has been praying for. And if you believe that love, faith, and small acts of courage still matter in this world, subscribe to the channel so we can continue sharing stories that heal, inspire, and remind us we are not alone. May God bless you and your family. May he protect every child, every animal, and every weary heart watching this now. And may you never doubt that even in the quietest moments, his miracles are still at work.